They gave her the forgotten corner of the station and a box of rocks. They saw a civilian analyst, a ghost in the system, a budgetary footnote attached to a mission she seemed utterly divorced from. When the profound silence of deep space was broken by a weapon they could not see, touch, or understand, the commander who mocked her learned a final, brutal lesson about the nature of power. He learned that some ghosts wear stars, and that his joke about her rank would be the last one he ever made in command. The air in Erebos Station had a taste. It was a flat, metallic flavor, the product of recycled oxygen, filtered water, and the faint, ever-present outgassing of stressed metal and composite materials. Dr. Eris Thorne, newly assigned commander of this deep space listening post, tasted only failure. He had expected a ship, a sleek destroyer with teeth and a pulse-pounding mission profile. He had been given a rock. Erebos was not built. It had been excavated. It was a hollowed-out C-type asteroid, a lump of carbonaceous chondrite fortified with ferrocrete and honeycombed with sensor arrays, anchored in a gravitationally stable Lagrange point that offered a perfect unobstructed view of the Viridian expanse. It was the quietest, most isolated posting in the entire Fifth Fleet, a place for careers to go to die. His magnetic boots clanged against the grated deck plates with deliberate force, an acoustic announcement of his authority. The handful of technicians and specialists hunched over their consoles straightened their backs, a wave of tension rippling through the command center. The room was a cavern, its walls the raw, dark silicate of the asteroid itself, sealed with a clear polymer that wept a constant, slow condensation. Fiber optic light ran in glowing veins across the rock, converging on the massive central holotank that currently displayed a placid star chart. The silence here was different from the silence of space. It was a pressurized, waiting silence, filled with the low hum of life support and the almost subliminal groan of the asteroid settling around them. Thorne hated it. It felt like being buried alive. "Status report, Lieutenant." Thorne's voice was a blunt instrument, designed to shatter the quiet. It was too loud for the space, a fact he seemed to relish. Lieutenant Kalin, a young officer whose face seemed permanently etched with the pale glow of data screens, didn't flinch. He was competent. Thorne had to give him that. His fingers moved with practiced economy over his console. "All systems green, Commander. Long-range passive sensors are operating at 100% efficiency. No anomalies detected. Ambient radiation levels are nominal. Station integrity is stable." Nominal, stable. Thorne spat the words like they were an insult. "This isn't a geological survey, Lieutenant. This is the sharp end of the spear. We are the fleet's eyes and ears on a hostile frontier." He gestured vaguely at the star chart. "Out there is the veil, and behind it, the illuminary. We know nothing about them except that they expand, and everything in their path goes dark. This station exists to give us the first warning. I expect more than nominal." Kalin's expression remained neutral, a carefully constructed mask of military deference. "The data is the data, sir. There is nothing to report." Thorne grunted, his dissatisfaction a palpable force in the room. He began his patrol, a predator pacing its cage. He stopped behind a young ensign, peering over her shoulder at a waterfall of incomprehensible code. "What is this, Ensign? Are you optimizing the nutrient paste allocation for the mess hall?" The ensign stiffened, her face flushing. "No, sir. I'm running a diagnostic on the tertiary comms buffer. There was a 0.03% latency spike at 0400. 0.03%, Thorne said, his voice dripping with condescension. "A catastrophe. By all means, dedicate our full attention to it. Meanwhile, the Illuminary could be mounting a fleet on our doorstep, and we'd be blind, deaf, and dumb." He moved on, leaving the ensign staring at her screen, her focus shattered. His leadership style was a hammer, and every problem, every person was a nail. He believed in readiness through fear, in sharpness through abrasion. He saw the quiet, methodical work of the station's crew not as professionalism, but as complacency. His tour of the command center brought him, inevitably, to the far corner. It was the darkest part of the cavern, a space tucked away behind a bank of secondary power conduits. Here, the raw rock of the asteroid wall was left exposed, and a single, custom-built console was bolted directly into it. The space was a small island of focused anomaly. Unlike the uniform blue and green readouts of the rest of the station, the holographic display here glowed with a chaotic symphony of amber, crimson, and deep violet lines. Waveforms, seismic plots, and resonant frequency models that looked more like abstract art than hard data. And there, seated on a simple stool, was the source of his deepest irritation. She was a ghost. She had been on the station when he arrived, a civilian attachment whose purpose was vaguely defined in her file as lithoacoustic analysis. Her name was Ilara Vance. She was unassuming to the point of being invisible. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. She wore a simple gray jumpsuit, devoid of any rank or insignia. She did not seem to be a part of the crew, or even a part of the military. She was simply there. Vance was bent over a piece of the asteroid, a core sample about the size of a human fist, resting on a small illuminated plate. In one hand, she held a microcaliper, its tips measuring some infinitesimal feature on the rock's surface. Her eyes, a shade of gray that seemed to absorb the dim light, were narrowed in concentration. She was so still, so utterly absorbed in her work, that she seemed to have forgotten she was on a military installation at all. To Thorne, she was the physical embodiment of everything wrong with this post. Esoteric, academic, and utterly useless in a fight. He watched her for a full minute, the hum of the station systems the only sound besides the faint, rhythmic click of her caliper. She didn't acknowledge his presence. It was as if a man of his rank and bearing was no more significant than a change in air pressure. The thought was galling. He cleared his throat, a loud, rasping sound. She didn't look up. "Specialist," he began, the title deliberately vague and dismissive. Her hands paused, but she still didn't turn. "My designation is consultant," she said, her voice quiet but clear, with a strange lack of inflection. It wasn't insubordinate, merely factual. It carried no emotion, no deference, no fear. It was a voice that simply conveyed data. Thorne strode closer, his boots making a sound like hammers on an anvil. He stood over her, casting a long shadow that swallowed her and her small workstation. "Consultant, I see. And what, precisely, are you consulting on? The structural integrity of our pebble collection?" He gestured at the neatly arranged rock samples on a nearby shelf. Finally, she looked up. Her gray eyes met his. There was no defiance in them, just a calm, analytical assessment. It was the look of a scientist observing an interesting but predictable phenomenon. It set his teeth on edge. "I'm mapping the resonant frequencies of the asteroid's silicate matrix," she stated. "Specifically, the propagation of low-frequency vibrations through its iron-nickel core." Thorne stared at her, a slow, incredulous smile spreading across his face. It was not a pleasant smile. It was a weapon of ridicule. "The asteroids' frequencies. You're listening to the rock sing," he chuckled, a harsh barking sound that echoed in the cavern. A few of the crew members glanced over, their faces carefully blank. And here I was, worried about an alien armada. I'm relieved to know we have a geologist on duty in case we're attacked by a particularly aggressive mineral deposit. The silence that followed was thick with his mockery. Vance's expression did not change. She simply held his gaze, her stillness a stark contrast to his performative bluster. Her calm was an accusation, a silent refutation of his entire worldview. It made him feel a flash of hot, raw anger. He was the commander. His authority was absolute. This civilian, this academic, was looking at him as if he were an irrelevance. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper meant to carry across the entire command center. "Let me be clear, consultant. This is a warship. Well, a stationary warship. Every person here has a function, a rank, a purpose in the chain of command. We are here to fight. Your little science project is a luxury we cannot afford. The power being routed to this hobby station of yours could be used to enhance sensor gain by another 2%. Vance's gaze flickered from his eyes to her console, where a complex, multi-layered waveform was slowly building. "The power draw is negligible," she said, her voice still a monotone. "And my work is not a hobby." "Oh, I'm sure you believe that," Thorne scoffed. He straightened up, projecting his voice again. "But on my station, we operate on a military footing. Everyone has a place. Everyone has a rank. It clarifies things. So, just for the sake of my own amusement," he smirked, a cruel glint in his eye. "What exactly is your title here? Rock polisher, first class, senior gravel inspector?" The question hung in the air, a public challenge designed to humiliate her, to put her firmly in her place as an outsider. He crossed his arms, waiting for her stammered, defensive reply. "Come on, state your rank and purpose." Vance turned her head slowly back to the core sample on her desk. She picked up a small pen-like device and aimed it at the rock. A low hum emanated from it, and the waveforms on her screen shifted in response. "My purpose," she said, her eyes fixed on the data, "is to listen to the song. My rank is not relevant to that function." The non-answer was more infuriating than any argument. It was a dismissal. Thorne felt a surge of fury, but he contained it, turning it into a final, theatrical pronouncement for the benefit of his crew. "A civilian," he announced, as if it were a disease. "Just as I thought. Keep to your corner and your pebbles, Consultant Vance. But know this, when the real work starts, you will stay out of the way. Is that understood?" "Understood," she replied, the word as flat and lifeless as the vacuum outside. She had already turned her full attention back to her instruments, the commander and his tirade apparently forgotten. Thorne stood there for a second longer, feeling oddly deflated. He had won the confrontation, asserted his dominance, but he felt no satisfaction. It was like punching water. He turned on his heel and stalked back to the central hollow tank, leaving her in the quiet solitude of her corner, alone with the silent, singing stone. He did not know that he had just made the gravest error of his command. He had mistaken the seismograph for a decoration. He had ignored the one person on the station who was not listening for the enemy, but to the very instrument the enemy was about to play. For 3 standard weeks, Erebos Station drifted in its quiet pocket of space, and Thorne's reign of abrasive readiness continued. He ran drills at all hours, pushing the crew to the point of exhaustion. He demanded constant reports, micromanaging every department until the quiet hum of the station was replaced by a thrum of collective anxiety. The ensign with the latency spike was reassigned to waste reclamation. Lieutenant Kalin found himself buried under a mountain of paperwork, his time on the primary sensor arrays cut in half to make way for another pointless tactical simulation. Through it all, Alara Vance remained in her corner, a fixed point of calm in Thorne's manufactured storm. She seemed to operate on a different timescale, her work measured in the slow, geologic breathing of the asteroid around them. Thorne made a point of ignoring her, treating her workstation as if it were a void. To him, she was less than a ghost. She was nothing. The crisis did not begin with a bang. It did not arrive as a flash of light or a proximity alert. It began as a feeling. It was a low, pervasive hum that seemed to originate not from the station's machinery, but from inside one's own skull. At first, it was barely perceptible, a subtle pressure behind the eyes, a faint vibration in the bones of the inner ear. The crew members shifted uncomfortably at their stations, shaking their heads as if to clear them of water. It was Kalin who first gave it a name. His eyes were wide, fixed on a secondary display he had jury-rigged to monitor subspace resonance patterns, a task Thorne had deemed a waste of time. "Commander," he said, his voice tight, "I have something. It's not a signal, not in any traditional sense. It's a wave, but it has no electromagnetic signature, no energy profile. It's pure frequency." Thorne strode over, his face a mask of irritation. "What are you talking about, Lieutenant? Is it a ship? Is it a weapon discharge?" "No, sir," Kalin insisted, pointing a trembling finger at the screen. A single, impossibly clean sine wave pulsed on the display, growing in amplitude with every passing second. "It has no point of origin. It's just here. It's everywhere. The wave is passing through the station, through the asteroid itself. It's not being blocked by the hull or the shields." As he spoke, the hum intensified. It grew from a subtle vibration into an audible, discordant tone, a single, maddening note that seemed to scrape against the inside of the command center. A coffee mug on a console rattled, then slid slowly to the edge and shattered on the deck. A hairline crack, thin as a spider's thread, appeared on the polymerized surface of the cavern wall. "It's a sonic weapon," Thorne declared, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for. A real threat. "All hands to battle stations. Raise shields to maximum. Charge main batteries. Target the source of that frequency." "Sir, I can't," Kalin said, his knuckles white as he gripped his console. "There is no source to target. The wave is non-local. It's resonating with something inside the station." The hum sharpened, rising in pitch. The deck plates began to vibrate, a tremor that ran up through the soles of their boots. The lights flickered, and the central holotank wavered, the star chart dissolving into a chaotic mess of static. Panic began to curdle in the air. "Do it!" Thorne roared, his authority a shield against the encroaching chaos. "Fire a full spread of countermeasures. Flood the area with jamming frequencies. Disrupt it." The crew, conditioned by weeks of his relentless drills, obeyed instantly. A weapons officer slammed his fist onto a firing stud. Outside the station, a volley of plasma charges and electronic warfare pods bloomed silently in the void. They had no effect. The hum continued to climb, the vibration growing more violent. It was like being inside a giant screaming bell. Another crack splintered across the rock wall, wider this time. Dust and small pebbles rained down from the ceiling. A secondary power conduit sparked, then went dark, plunging half the room into shadow. "It's not working, sir," the weapons officer yelled over the din. "The countermeasures are passing right through it. There's nothing to jam." Thorne's face was pale, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. His playbook, the sacred text of conventional naval warfare, was useless. Brute force was having no effect. Shields, armor, weapons, the entire vocabulary of his profession, meant nothing. The enemy wasn't attacking the station. It was attacking the laws of physics that held the station together. The humming became a physical force, pressing in on them, shaking their teeth in their sockets. The very air vibrated, making it hard to breathe. The illuminary wasn't knocking on the door. It was turning the house itself into the weapon. The structural integrity alarms began to scream, a high-pitched, panicked counterpoint to the weapon's deep, resonant drone. Red lights flashed across the command center, painting the terrified faces of the crew in strokes of blood and shadow. "Multiple stress fractures detected in sectors Gamma and Delta," an engineer shouted, his voice cracking. "The primary spine is beginning to shear. The station is tearing itself apart." Thorne stood frozen in the center of the room, his mind a blank. He had no more orders to give. Every tool in his arsenal had been tried and had failed. He was a commander with no command, an authority with no answers. The system had failed. Tradition had failed. He had failed. The noise was now a deafening, all-consuming roar, the shriek of an entire asteroid being vibrated into dust. The end was not coming in fire and thunder, but in a single, perfect, inescapable note. In the midst of the collective paralysis, a new sound cut through the chaos. It was small, precise, and utterly incongruous. The soft click of a caliper being set down on a metal tray. Every head that could turn, turned. In the far corner, the one that had been plunged into partial darkness, a single light remained. The glow of Alara Vance's custom console. She stood up from her stool, her movements calm and deliberate, an island of impossible serenity in the raging storm. She had not panicked. She had not even seemed surprised. She had been observing, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to a complex piece of music. Her face was a mask of intense, analytical concentration. She walked from the shadows into the flashing red light of the main command center. She did not run. Her steps were measured, her posture erect. She walked directly to Lieutenant Kalen's station, her gray eyes ignoring the terrified commander entirely. She looked at the pure sine wave on Kalen's display, which was now oscillating so violently it was a solid band of light. "The frequency is 7.38 hertz, she said, her voice quiet, but carrying with absolute clarity over the deafening roar. It was not a guess. It was a statement of fact. "They've matched the primary resonant frequency of the asteroid's core. They're inducing a harmonic cascade. In 90 seconds, the internal stresses will reach critical failure. The entire station will sublimate into gravel." Thorne finally broke from his stupor, his face a mess of sweat and disbelief. "What are you talking about? Who are you?" he stammered, his authority stripped away, leaving only raw, naked fear. Vance didn't even look at him. Her entire focus was on the data. She pointed to a schematic of the station on Kalen's console. "I need you to divert all available power from the main reactor and the shield grid to the geological stabilizers, specifically arrays 7, 12, and 19. The order was insane. The geological stabilizers were low-power devices used for minor seismic adjustments, the station's equivalent of shock absorbers. Diverting all power to them would mean dropping what little remained of their shields and taking the main reactor offline, leaving them utterly defenseless. "That's suicide," Thorne bellowed, finding his voice again. "You'll leave us exposed. You'll shut down life support." "Life support will run on batteries for 12 minutes, Vance countered, without looking at him. "The shields are irrelevant. The wave is passing through them. The reactor's magnetic containment field is interfering with the solution. It needs to be powered down." Her logic was cold, swift, and absolute. Kalen stared at her, then at his commander. He saw Thorne, a man broken by a problem he couldn't solve by shouting or shooting. Then he looked at Vance, a woman who had not only diagnosed the problem to the decimal point, but was proposing a solution, however insane it sounded. He had seen the failure of orthodoxy. He had spent weeks watching her work, sensing a depth of knowledge he couldn't fathom. He made his choice. "Which arrays did you say?" Kalen asked, his fingers already flying over his console. 7, 12, and 19, Vance repeated. "Set them to broadcast a counter frequency. I'm uploading the waveform now. It will be a complex phase-shifted pattern. The timing must be exact." "You are countermanding a direct order, Lieutenant," Thorne screamed, lunging for Kalen's console. "I am in command here." Kalen didn't even look up. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking but resolute, "your methods have failed. Hers is the only plan we have left." He hit a final key. "Power being diverted. Shields are down. Reactor is spooling down." A new alarm blared, this one signaling a total power failure. The main lights in the command center died, plunging them into an even deeper darkness, lit only by the red emergency strobes and the glow of Vance's uploaded waveform on Kalen's screen. The station gave a violent, groaning lurch, as if its spine had finally snapped. Vance moved to her own console, which, connected to an independent power source, still glowed brightly. The complex pattern she had sent to Kalen now dominated her main display. "Initiating broadcast," she said, her voice a calm whisper in the roaring dark. Her fingers began to move across the holographic interface, not with the frantic energy of a panicked operator, but with the precise, graceful movements of a concert pianist. She wasn't fighting the enemy's song. She was adding a new instrument to the orchestra. The station screamed. The vibration intensified tenfold, a bone-shattering, mind-breaking shudder that threw people from their feet. It felt as if the asteroid was being ripped apart from the inside out, the counter-frequency she had introduced clashing with the enemy's weapon in a cataclysmic crescendo. Thorne was on the floor, his hands over his ears, his face a rictus of pure terror. He was certain she had killed them all, that this was the final agonizing moment of their destruction. This was her solution? To make it worse? Vance's eyes were locked on the waveforms, two beautiful, terrible serpents of light dancing on her screen. One was the clean, perfect scene wave of the enemy weapon. The other was her own, a jagged, chaotic, and utterly ugly mess of spikes and troughs. She was not trying to cancel the enemy's wave. She was trying to invert it, to fold it back on itself. She was using the iron-nickel core of the asteroid as a massive tuning fork, creating a precise, calculated destructive interference. It was an act of cosmic acoustics, a feat of physics so elegant and so audacious it bordered on magic. Her fingers made a final, minute adjustment, nudging a phase shift by a fraction of a degree. Perfect. The waveforms on her screen converged. For a single, breathtaking instant, they merged into one, then flattened into a perfectly straight, silent line. and the universe went quiet. The ungodly roar, the bone-jarring vibration, the pressure, the panic, it all vanished. It did not fade. It ceased to exist, as if a switch had been thrown. The sudden, absolute silence was more shocking than the noise had been. It was a physical presence, a vacuum that rushed in to fill the space where the chaos had been. The only sounds were the lingering echo of the last alarm, the frantic gasps of the crew, and the soft, steady hum of the battery-powered life support. The station was no longer shaking. The cracks in the walls were still there, dark scars on the rock, but they were no longer spreading. The dust had settled. In the dim red emergency light, the crew slowly picked themselves up off the deck, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning awe. They were alive. The attack was over. They all stared, as one, at the woman standing calmly before her console. Elara Vance was looking at her screen, where the flat line held steady. She showed no sign of triumph, no relief, no emotion at all. She was simply observing the result, confirming her hypothesis. She had taken an alien superweapon of unimaginable power, and with nothing more than a rock, a computer, and a perfect understanding of the music it made, she had silenced it. Kalen was the first to speak, his voice a ragged whisper. "It's gone. The frequency is gone." He looked at Vance, his expression one of pure, unadulterated reverence. He didn't see a civilian consultant. He saw the architect of a miracle. Thorne, still on the floor, pushed himself up on trembling arms. He stared at Vance, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. This woman, this ghost he had ridiculed and dismissed, had just saved them all with her esoteric nonsense. She had succeeded where his rank, his training, and his entire philosophy of command had catastrophically failed. The humiliation was a physical blow, more stunning than the vibration had been. Before anyone else could speak, a new light began to flash on the main comms panel. It was a single, insistent crimson pulse, a color reserved for only one thing, a Priority 1 command-level channel from Fleet Headquarters. It was a link that bypassed all local protocols, a direct line from the gods of the fleet. Kalen, his training kicking in, moved to the panel. "It's a quantum-entangled channel, sir," he said, his voice still shaky. He automatically looked toward Thorne, but his gaze immediately shifted to Vance. The hierarchy in the room had already changed. It had been reforged in the crucible of the crisis, competence replacing rank as the only currency that mattered. "Put it on screen," Vance said quietly. She hadn't moved from her station. Kalen nodded and activated the channel. The central holotank, which had been dark, flickered to life. It resolved into the face of a man, old and weathered, his features carved from granite. He wore the uniform of a fleet admiral, its collar heavy with the 5 stars of the highest rank in the Alliance Navy. The nameplate on the display read, F. Admiral Marcus Jorick. He was the supreme commander of the entire Alliance fleet, a living legend. A wave of shock went through the crew. Jorick himself never handled post-action reports for a mere listening station. Jorick's eyes, chips of blue ice, scanned the damaged command center, taking in the cracked walls and the exhausted faces of the crew. His expression was grim. "Erebos Station, this is Fleet Admiral Jorick. Report your status." Thorne saw his chance. It was a slim, desperate opportunity to reclaim his narrative, to salvage something from the wreckage of his authority. He scrambled to his feet, brushed the dust from his uniform, and stepped forward, trying to project an air of command he no longer felt. "Admiral Jorick," he began, his voice raspy. "Commander Thorne reporting. We were targeted by an unknown hostile force. We sustained heavy structural damage, but I managed to repel the attack. The situation is now under control." Admiral Jorik's gaze settled on Thorne, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop by 20 degrees. The Admiral's silence was more damning than any reprimand. He listened to Thorne's pathetic attempt to claim victory, his expression unchanging. When Thorne finished, Jorik did not acknowledge his report. He did not even acknowledge his existence. "I am not speaking to you, Commander," Jorik said, his voice a low rumble of Arctic cold. The word struck Thorne with the force of a physical blow. The Admiral's gaze swept past him, searching the dimly lit room. "Put Ghost One on the line," a confused murmur went through the crew. Ghost One? It was a code name, a designation none of them had ever heard. Thorne stood frozen, his mouth half open, the lie he had constructed turning to ash on his tongue. He had no idea who Jorik was talking about. Kalen, however, understood instantly. His mind made the connection in a flash of pure, chilling insight. The ghost in the system. The quiet professional who operated outside the chain of command. The woman whose file was a black hole of redacted information. He slowly turned and gestured the comms pickup toward the corner where Vance stood. Alara Vance stepped forward into the holotank's light. Her face, calm and impassive, appeared on the screen next to Jorik's. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Ghost One reporting, Admiral," she said, her voice the same flat, factual monotone she always used. Jorik's severe expression softened, just for an instant, with something that looked like relief. "Report, Alara. The telemetry we received before you initiated the counter-resonance was alarming. The weapon was a resonant frequency projector, tuned to this asteroid's specific geological signature," she explained, her voice cutting through the stunned silence of the command center. "A harmonic cascade weapon. Elegant. They didn't need to pierce our shields, just find the right note to shake us apart. I used the station's seismic stabilizers to generate a destructive interference pattern, using the asteroid's own core lithology to cancel their waveform. The threat is neutralized. The enemy's signature has been recorded." Jorik nodded slowly, absorbing the technical details. "And the weapon's platform. Did you get a location?" "Negative," Vance said. "The nature of the weapon makes it non-local. It could have been fired from a light year away, but the signature is unique. I will be able to identify it if they use it again." "As I expected," Jorik said. It wasn't praise. It was a statement of faith in a known quantity. He paused, his icy gaze once again falling on the stunned figure of Commander Thorne. A new, dangerous edge entered his voice. "Report your personal status, Admiral." The word detonated in the silence of the room. Admiral. It was not a mistake. It was not a slip of the tongue. It was a title, spoken by the highest authority in the fleet, directed at the unassuming woman in the plain gray jumpsuit. Vance's expression remained unchanged, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Not pride, but perhaps a touch of weariness. "Status is green, Admiral Jorik," she replied, her voice steady. "I am unharmed." The collective shock in the room was a physical force. The crew stared at her, their minds reeling, recontextualizing every moment since her arrival. The quiet consultant, the ghost in the corner, the woman who listened to rocks, an admiral. Not just an admiral, but one on a first-name basis with the Supreme Commander himself. One who had a code name like a top-tier intelligence asset. Thorn made a small, choking sound. His face had gone from pale to ashen. The universe had not just tilted on its axis, it had inverted itself. The civilian he had mocked, the woman he had publicly humiliated and ordered to stay out of the way, was not just his superior. She was so far above him in the true hierarchy of the fleet that he was little more than dust on her boots. His joke, the one he had made for the amusement of the crew, "State your rank," came rushing back to him, a memory that was now an instrument of his own execution. Jorik's full, undivided attention was now fixed on Thorn. The fleet admiral's voice was no longer cold. It was forged from iron and fury. "Commander Thorn," he began, each word a hammer blow. "The woman you have been obstructing is Admiral Alara Vance, head of the Office of Strategic Resonance and the Alliance's foremost expert on unconventional warfare. Her codename is Ghost One because her work is so critical that her existence is classified above the level of most sector commands. She was placed on your station because my intelligence suggested the Illuminary were developing exactly this kind of weapon, and Erebos was the most likely first target. Her hobby, as I believe you called it, was the only thing standing between this station and annihilation." Jorik paused, letting the weight of his words crush Thorn completely. "You will be taken into custody by your security staff. You will be transported to Fleet Command on the next supply vessel, where you will face a court-martial for dereliction of duty, endangerment of a strategic asset, and the gross incompetence that nearly cost us our first and only warning of a new existential threat. You are relieved of command, effective immediately." The comms channel cut out, leaving Jorik's final words echoing in the profound silence. Thorn stood swaying for a moment, his eyes vacant, seeing nothing. He was a man who had been hollowed out, his pride, his rank, and his future scooped out of him in the space of 2 minutes. Two of his own security officers, their faces grim and unreadable, stepped forward and took him gently by the arms. He didn't resist. He was no longer a commander. He was just a passenger on his way to judgment. As they led him away, he looked back one last time at Admiral Vance. She wasn't watching him. She had already turned back to her console, her attention once again consumed by the silent, singing data of the cosmos. To her, he was already an irrelevance. In the hours that followed, a new order settled over Erebos Station. It was not an order imposed by rank or regulation, but one that grew organically from a foundation of undeniable competence. The frantic energy of Thorn's command was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused professionalism. The crew moved with a newfound purpose, their actions efficient and their voices low. They were no longer just following orders. They were participants in a mission whose stakes had been made terrifyingly clear. And at the center of this new quiet, like a gravitational point, was Admiral Vance. They treated her with a new kind of reverence, a mixture of awe and a healthy dose of fear. They gave her a wide berth, speaking in hushed tones when they had to pass her workstation. They saw her now not as a person, but as a force of nature, a living legend who had walked among them in disguise. They saw the unassuming gray jumpsuit not as the uniform of a civilian, but as the vestment of an authority so absolute it required no insignia. Vance, for her part, seemed completely oblivious to the change. She showed no pleasure in her vindication, no satisfaction in Thorn's downfall. The entire drama of human ego and hierarchy was, to her, just noise, a distracting variable in a far more important equation. Her victory had not been over a foolish commander. It had been over a flawed physical principle, Her focus had already shifted. The enemy was still out there. The song they sang was still a threat. Late into the station's designated night cycle, as the emergency repairs were proceeding with quiet efficiency, Lieutenant Kalen approached her corner. He moved tentatively, as if entering a holy sanctuary. He did not carry a weapon or a formal report. In his hands, he held a single, steaming mug. It was real coffee, brewed from a stash he kept for special occasions. He placed it carefully on the edge of her console, on a small, clear patch of desk. Vance looked up from her analysis of the captured enemy waveform. Her gray eyes rested on him, analytical as always, but without the cold distance they had held before. She saw the offering for what it was, not a sycophantic gesture to a superior officer, but a token of profound professional respect. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she said, her voice a shade warmer than usual. "It's Kalen, ma'am," he replied quietly. "Just Kalen." He gestured not at the coffee, but at her holographic display, where the alien frequency was now rendered in 3 dimensions, a spiraling helix of deadly energy. "I was reviewing the logs, the phase shift you initiated. It wasn't just a counter frequency. It was predictive. You anticipated the modulations they would use to try and defeat a simple jam." "Their pattern was logical," Vance explained, turning back to the display. Her fingers traced one of the helixes of light. It followed a clear mathematical progression. Any intelligence that could develop a resonant weapon would base its tactical adaptations on sound principles. I didn't predict their moves. I just did the math. "The math," Kalen repeated, a sense of wonder in his voice. He looked from the impossibly complex data to the calm, unassuming woman who saw it as simple arithmetic. He had spent his entire career believing that leadership was about charisma, decisiveness, and the projection of strength. Thorne had embodied all of that. But it was Vance, with her quiet focus and her devotion to the pure, cold logic of data, who had shown him what true command looked like. It wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the right one. He didn't ask her about her rank or her past, or the legendary code name Ghost One. All of that was part of the old world, the world of ego and insignia. It was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the work. "Is there anything you need, Admiral?" he asked, the title feeling natural on his tongue for the first time. Vance took a sip of the coffee. The warmth seemed to surprise her slightly, a small, human sensation in her world of abstract forces. She looked at the captured data, at the silent, lethal beauty of the enemy's song. "Yes," she said, her focus already 1,000 light-years away. "Get me a deeper core sample. I need to know what other notes this rock can play." Her purpose fulfilled, her authority established not by declaration, but by demonstration, Admiral Vance did not stay. A week later, a nondescript long-range courier docked with the station. She left as she had arrived, quietly, without ceremony, carrying only a small case of data crystals and a single, carefully chosen rock. She left behind a command center that ran with the silent efficiency of a well-oiled machine, and a crew that would forever look at the dark, silent stone around them, not as a prison, but as an instrument of immense power. They had learned the lesson she had come to teach, a lesson not of warfare, but of reality itself. They learned that the greatest power does not always come from the barrel of a gun, but from the quiet mind that understands the fundamental principles of the universe. They learned that true authority is not seized, but earned, and that competence is a rank all its own. The legend of Ghost One would be told in whispers for years to come, a cautionary tale for arrogant commanders, and a beacon of hope for the quiet professionals. The ghosts in the machine who listen and wait for the one song that only they know how to silence.